So, thank you. And I thought about this yesterday when I was thinking about what my plans are for today. I'm actually going to my best friend's son's wedding after this, and so I got all dolled up. And I mean, if you saw me yesterday, like that's my normal attire, like flip-flops and blue jeans or whatever. And then I thought, so I'm going to be wearing this 50s retro A-frame with petticoat, my mama's pearls, and I'm going to talk about women. I'm like, I'm not sure how that's going to go over, but so be it. Here I am. So, for what that's worth. And, I should also start a little bit about myself, too, because it's important to what I'm going to talk about, my perspective from my experience as a woman on the mission field, because everyone is going to experience it a little bit differently, right? So my background is important to understand. My mother was, in Rush Limbaugh's words, a feminazi. Okay, so she was a hippie, the hippie generation, right? And so free love. I mean, the van that my parents would drive us to school in, like, had hand-painted love and doves on it. I mean, like the whole legit thing, right? So, and I remember this very distinctly. So she was. She graduated as an engineer and worked in in the Bay Area. She was a computer engineer. And that, in that time frame, that was not a thing that a woman would do. And so when I was young, I just distinctly remember this, very strong, powerful woman taking me to the music store because I wanted to play violin. Well, 6-year-old wants to play violin. What does that mean? And, 2 months later, I'm going to not want to play the violin, right? So she didn't want to buy me a violin. She wanted to rent it. So we went into the music store to rent this violin, and she was filling out the application for it, and there was a spot there that had husband's job. And she didn't fill that portion out. And so she went to go turn in the application, and the guy said, well, there's this section that's missing. And she's like, well, yeah. He said, well, we can't rent to you. Because her husband's information was not on the form. And as a 6-year-old, I remember that, and I thought, wow, that was so interesting. So that was a really cool thing about my mom, being a very powerful, strong woman, instilled in me that same kind of feelings. And then the other really interesting note about my mom, which I'll share later on why I'm even telling you all this. I love my mom dearly. She passed away 7 years ago, but she was the woman in my life. But she was a witch. And that was like before Wicca came out and all that, right? So she was a Wicca before Wicca was like a cool thing to be, if you will. So much that my dad built a pyramid in our living room, like out of, I don't know, some metal material, I don't know. So to watch TV, I had to sit under the pyramid because it filled the whole space, right? So I truly thought nothing about this because this is how I grew up. Like Halloween was the big deal at our home. She had a palm reading service, tarot cards, like the whole shebang. And then I met my husband. Well, I became a Christian through Young Life in high school. Now, my mother, being a spiritual woman, embraced others of spiritual value too. So she didn't claim Christ, but she thought he was a great teacher. He brought peace. He was all this, Buddha, and, the whole shebang. And so we invited Young Life to our house all the time, which kind of seems odd, right, that in this Wiccan's house there was Young Life, but there you have it. God works in fun ways. But so I became a Christian in high school, but I had non-believing parents and no one else around me that was believers, so I didn't really know. I would just go to some random church every Sunday, right? Joined the military, which there's probably many other military people here, not really a conducive environment for the Christian faith, right, if you will. And I was also in a Patriot missile system battalion, which meant 400 men and 2 women. So very not conducive for the Christian belief. Got out of military, went to Sacramento, met Mike, and he's like, you can date me, but we have to go to church. That's my criteria. I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. So we went, and then he started learning about my life, and he's like, had a really weird life. Like, that's really strange. And honestly, I had never thought about it before because it was normal for me, right? It's what I grew up in, and candles on the north, south, east, west wall. I mean, that whole thing. My mom the tree fell down across the street. It was eucalyptus in a big windstorm. So we've got earth and we've got air, right? Elements, right? So she sent my dad across the street, and I'm like, Mom, where are you sending Dad? She's like, well, he's going to go get a branch from the tree. You're going to go get him a magic wand? Like, legit. But again, I didn't really think anything weird about it until Mike pointed all those strange oddities in my life. I'm like, oh, okay. And I thought, well, that's, weird factor. And then, we went on the mission field, and I thought, well, that'll never come into play. Well, we went to a country that worships witches. And so it was really cool how I'm like, I can talk to these people. Like, I lived that. That was my life, right? So, coming full circle, I'm like, God, he does. He kind of has a sense of humor sometimes, I think, right? He's like, I'm going to put you through that because I got a plan for you. So I want you to remember, when you're going through those weird circumstances and experiences, God's got this plan, right? All we see is this tiny little puzzle piece. He sees the big picture. So he used that witchcraft. It was just weird. Anyways. And another thing that was brought up earlier, so challenging you folks to go to places that make you uncomfortable. So we moved to Africa. So, we went from Honduras, where everyone is average of about 5 foot, right? I'm 6'1". And I clearly don't look Hispanic whatsoever. So we went from that to Africa, our little country in Africa, where everyone is very tall. So that was like, yes, like we're walking the same height here now. But I'm very white, right? It just doesn't really fit in. So, I've got this kind of hair, and going into the barber shop, I'd walk in, and they're like, just leave. I don't know what to do with you. But, all right, go to the next one. Same, just don't even sit. Just leave. Like, I don't know what to do with you. So, I tried. I tried to meet that challenge, but failed miserably. So the other fun experience that I had, talking about languages and being a God to all nations, is in Honduras. When we were first moving into our community, we wanted to say, okay, what do you guys want from us? Like, we don't want to impose on you what we think that you want. So they decided they wanted English classes. I'm like, great, that's awesome. We can do that. I got you covered. So I'm going around the whole village and community and talking to individuals, and this little old guy, he came up to me. He's like, what do you want? And I said, so we've got this English class I want to put on. So we're all talking in Spanish, of course, right? And he says, but God speaks Spanish. I'm like, well, yeah, I'm pretty sure he speaks like all languages. But he's like, no, the Bible, it's in Spanish. So he speaks Spanish, so I don't need to learn English. And he said, and besides, when we go to heaven, like, we're all going to speak the same language. I'm like, dude, I just had someone worship to me on the street corner when I'm trying to teach them English. And I'm like, what an awesome experience. Clearly, he had no interest of going to my English class. I was not crushed whatsoever, but I learned something. So I thought that was really super fun. So, all right. So anyway, let's talk about women. So I had to give you my background of the kind of family I was raised in, very strong woman, very whatever. So when Mike said we're going to go on the mission field, I said yes, and he was like, okay, wait. I had this really long conversation planned out in my head that you were going to say no, and I was going to say, see, God, it's her fault, it's not mine, and now you said yes, and so, oh my gosh, we have to do this thing. I said, yeah. So then and I said, God, just please, anywhere but someplace cold. I don't do cold. I don't like cold. I'm long-limbed, like my blood barely makes it to my fingertips. So I get cold really easily. And I'm like, please, we're going to end up, wherever. Someplace with snow. And I didn't want snow. So he sends us to Honduras. 95% humidity, 95 degrees year-round. Thank you, God, for answering my prayer. Maybe you could have read into it a little bit more, but we're good. Okay, so, yeah. So it's been an interesting adventure where God has taken us and where he's led us. And if you're not familiar, if you haven't spent a lot of time with the Latin culture, so the Latin, and okay, I am also speaking very generically, please, okay, so understand that. But having lived there for 8 years, I can speak to some of that. Women are in a different level, if you will, than men are in most Latin cultures than we would tend to find in the United States. So here's this strong-willed, 6'1" woman going into a Latin culture, and it was a culture shock. Gee, big surprise, right? So learning the language and learning the culture and being a woman and going into this kind of culture was a huge, huge, huge challenge for me. So Mike has written a blog post once talking about kind of the adversarial relationship that we have with churches, that missionaries do. So I'm going to be a little transparent in some of these things I'm going to share with you. So things are going great. We're planning all these churches. I'm speaking theoretically. People being baptized and all this. But in reality, like, I'm having daily meltdowns. Like, my daughter's struggling in school. Like, I'm like, we need to just go off the field because my daughter is, that's how bad it was when our first year that we were there. Well, we don't share those things because we want you all to know that things are great and we're doing well and life doesn't really suck, and it really sucks sometimes, right? When I was helping out doing some training for some missionaries, they wanted me to do a spiel on thriving on the mission field. And so the day before, we were talking about what we were going to be talking about the next day, and one of the missionaries to be raised her hand and she said, well, but what if your day sucks? She literally used that word, which, interesting, she's not from California, but I say that all the time. So I said, okay, well, that's going to be what this topic's about. She's like, yeah, but what if I live in a sucky place? And I said, okay, well, we'll get to that. So I changed the name of the training from Thriving on the Field to Thriving in Sucky Land. And it really spoke, though, because, again, you see all these missionaries' stories and these movies and these books, and they're going to these great places, and it's jungle, and it's awesome, and it's miserable, and it's sweaty, and you can't drink the water, and just life sometimes sucks. And then you take along the baggage that you had in the United States, right? Maybe some small things and whatever, but you've got friends around, you've got family around, you have your culture around, and then you move to Sucky Land, and you don't have your friends around, you don't have your family around, you have these little tiny things that were like no big deal, suddenly becomes this ginormous monstrosity in your life. The first 6 months we were in Honduras, we had a team coming. Yeah, who does that? 2 months, actually, they came 2 months after we got in country. Like, we were the first ones ground planning. Who does that? That's just whatever. That's just how we roll. It was stupid. Don't ever do that. But, so I thought, okay, we're going to get them donuts. So we actually had a Dunkin' Donuts in town. Walked into Dunkin' Donuts, and they had no donuts. I literally was like, it was, okay, bad missionary moment. Again, don't do this. I said to the lady, what is the name of your store? I went there. That was just bad, so I'm repenting from that. But I'm like, but you don't have donuts. Okay, whatever. So I left. 2 weeks later, I went to Burger King. You know where this is going to go. And I went in, and they had no hamburgers. I'm like, and I almost went there again, but I didn't. I bit my tongue. I learned. God talked to me. Don't ask them the name of their store. So I did not ask them. Burger King, the name of their store. Then I went to the gas station. You know where this is going. There was literally no gas at the gas station. I had to pay my daughter's school tuition. And you don't pay it at the school, you pay it at the bank. I don't know why, it's just the way they work, their account is. And you have to pay in cash. So many most third world countries don't use credit cards. Everything's a cash culture, right? So I had to get I had to get cash from the bank. You know where this is going. The bank had no money. I went to the chicken place that had no chicken, and I'm like, I've only been here a few months. What in the world have I gotten myself into, right? I mean, this was a whole, it was like the culture shock of culture shocks. I'm like, honeymoon, that was over like, 2 weeks in, like that honeymoon stage, you love it, it's all great, and it's cool. It was like gone 2 weeks into Honduras, it was already gone. So, yeah, anyway. So the role of women in the mission field has really dramatically changed since missions has kind of come around. So it was men that went on the mission field, pastors, priests would go. I mean, you'd go with your coffin because you went expecting to live and die there. I mean, truly, that's how they went. They packed stuff in their coffin, they went off. So women weren't really embraced into the culture of missions. We have come a long way. So clearly, given the topic, what do you think the majority of the sexes not the majority, the larger percentage of sex that goes out onto the mission field today are women? Statistically, more women go on the mission field than men do. So it's a little hard to find really, really good stats on it, but of all of the places that I looked, everyone was in agreement that there are more women that go on the field than men. And single women, 80 to 85% of singles are women that go on the mission field. So that's why we're talking about women on the mission field, because even if you are not a woman, which many of you are not, you are going to be working with women, right? And so understanding what women go through is going to be very different than what men go through when they go on the mission field, okay? So men really have that desire for the family, right? That is their goal. So I do not want to belittle what that means, because that's a whole lot. When they're responsible for the spiritual health of your family, I mean, that's a big deal, right? Mom and women, we play a different role, right? So I worried about my kid, I worried about myself, I worried about my husband, I worried about my ministry. I worried about a lot, and I'm pretty sure the Bible's got a lot to say about not worrying, right? A lot. But there I was, sinning yet again, repenting once more. So one of the trainings that we do is, it talks a lot about grace, and talks a lot about redemption, and talks a lot about mercy, and you have to embrace those things. And I tell you what, you really come to an understanding when you say, I rely upon God. And we like to say that, right? Because that's what God tells us to do. And so we want to know that we believe that. Until you go into one of those really challenging circumstances and situations, are you really going to find out if you do truly have reliance upon God? Well, talk to a missionary, and they're going to tell you, I rely upon God, because if it was in my own skill and my own strength, I'd have been leaving 6 months after I got to Honduras, no doubt, okay? So women do have a little more, a harder role, because in many, many, many cultures, men run the communities, they run the population, they run the government, they run lots of things, and me being a strong-willed woman going into this kind of culture was a huge, huge challenge. So when we talk about old dead white guys, they're great and they're awesome, and we were challenged to read stuff that's not dead or alive white men. And so then you think about many of your missionaries. Most of the missionaries that probably are your go-tos are going to be men, right? But we've all heard of Amy Carmichael, I hope, right? We've heard of Elizabeth Elliot, right? Corrie ten Boom. I mean, these are strong, powerful women that we as women also need to read. And so that's my challenge to you men out there, is to read about them and understand from their perspective what they're going through. So what is the role of women in missions? I have a few letters behind my name, but certainly not Reverend being one of them. although those aren't letters. But anyways, you know what I mean. So I don't have those kinds behind my name. So what can I do on the mission field, right? What does a woman do on the mission field? Well, I get this question asked a lot, especially as a nurse. So I'm a nurse and a woman going into a field that didn't have a physician, and so like, oh, well, what can you do? Well, I kind of wrote a book talking about what I did. And it comes to be an interesting point where you say, what can women do? Because women can meet people in places that men can't, right? So me going in and helping a mom labor and deliver a baby, although that's a funny story because I'm totally rabbit trailing. I went and helped out at the public hospital, and so I taught childbirth classes for over 20 years. I was a labor and delivery nurse for about a year until I went into pediatric oncology. And so I felt I have a lot to offer. So I'm going in and doing my doula thing and breathing. And so I was talking to this mom before she was having contractions about what we were going to do. I knew it was a failed attempt when she literally started laughing in the middle of contractions. Like, this is just not going to happen. So I started doing things before women got to the hospital, basically childbirth classes. But that is a very unique role to be able to be in. You don't have to be a nurse to do that, right? But it sure helps to be a woman, especially in that kind of culture, right, where men are not involved in childbirth. Women do it amongst themselves, right? And most of the women a large percentage of the women in Honduras would have babies at home, right? So you had laboring moms that were being helped out by the women in the community. What an awesome place to be. Because not only if the end result is good, where you have a good and healthy baby, let's talk about that. Let's talk about creation. Let's talk about that child being in that belly and that God knows that child before they were even conceived. Then let's talk about the other sad side if a child does not survive. What a privilege to be there with that woman and talk about hope and love and God and who they are under God and the hope behind that. So women have such a neat, fun, and unique way to meet non-believers and believers on the mission field that men just will not have the opportunity to do. So then, being this strong woman who started working when I was 15 and a half, because that was the earliest you could, right, in California. I don't know what it is now, but anyways, got a worker's permit when I was 15 and a half. I was working at Arby's, my first job, and I still love Arby's. So if that tells you anything, that's a good thing, right? Usually you despise what you do, especially fast food. Anyway, so the only time I hadn't worked was when Madison was born, and I took 3 months off and then went back to work when she was 3 months old. Worked night shift so I could be a stay-at-home mom basically at the same time as taking care of my kid. So I never slept, basically. Did not sleep forever. Anyway, so, and no PTSD there. So it was interesting then. Now I'm going to the mission field. And guess what? I don't make any money. And I didn't realize that I had issues with that. I didn't realize that I was having to pull money out of my husband's account, like if I needed to go get cash, right? Until we came back on furlough, and I worked at Phoenix Children's Hospital, and I did a pediatric oncology again, and did that for about 10 months while we were on furlough. And I did it per diem, which meant I could work when I wanted to, and then we would go, Mike was traveling all the time, but then there's lots of time that I would go and travel and visit churches and that kind of thing. Well, we paid cash for my daughter to study abroad during the summer. Like, we paid off all of her debt. Like, we'd go out to eat, and I'm like, because I'm contributing. And then we went back on the mission field. And I was like, wow, I have no worth. I have no value because I'm not contributing to the family. And I hadn't realized that I held that until I experienced it, right? So I'm like, I bring nothing to this because my culture, my mom, my California, let's just say it, right, tells us, and our previous speaker probably said, stuff and money and where you are as a professional, that defines you. And I did not realize how ingrained that was into me until for 4 years I made no money, and then went back on furlough and made all sorts of, I'm going to just say nurses make really good money, right? Made all sorts of money. And then I got a little bitter. And so again, I'm being very transparent here. So I had to tell my husband about that. I had to confess that to him. I said, I'm a little bitter about that right now. And he's like, well, we'll just change all the payroll stuff over to your name. And I'm like, that's awesome and sweet. I said, but that's not the point. So you're missing the boat, dude. But I really had to embrace that, right? So as a woman, and that happens, I'm just going to say, to the majority of women who are married that go on the mission field, and if they were working women, they all have to process that. And I had never even considered that before. And I'm like, we need to talk about this. Because where do you find your worth? I find my worth in Christ, but I had to make my heart get there because I didn't realize I didn't get that. So it went from here, where, and this is my Bible, you know, electronic version. It went from me reading this and here, but it had to get here. And so I really want to challenge you guys on that too, when you're sending women out on the mission field, especially if they're a single woman. Because if they're single, they're definitely their own breadwinner, right? Unless they're going straight from, you know, high school and then onto the mission field. But otherwise, those single women are their own breadwinners, and they're going to be making their money. But I'm going to tell you, you don't go to missions to make money. Are you with me? Right? So they're going to go from being very professional women, career-driven, making, you know, whatever kind of money, to not hardly speaking the language, feeling stupid, right? That's a fun story. And so you have to realize and recognize that and, you know, try and flesh that out. You know, where do you find your worth? So never trust kids. You're learning a new language, right? Hey, listen, if I know you long enough, if I make an error, please tell me, because I'm going to keep making the same mistake over and over and over and over, unless somebody tells me, right? So unfortunately, we relied on children to do that for us. So we would hear kids all the time say, hey, que pedo, que pedo. It's kind of like, dude, what's up, right? Our California equivalent of what's up. And so we're like, oh, okay. So we started incorporating that into how we would talk. We talk to, hey, you know, good friends or a pastor, hey, pastor, que pedo? And they're like, and turn around and walk the other way. I'm like, oh, that was weird. Okay, maybe just a bad day. And then, you know, a grandma I would go and visit in her home. Oh, mi amor, que pedo? And I'm like, oh, okay. So we did what MTW always told us to do. You find a language coach, basically, right? So we finally did what they told us to do in their wisdom. And so we said, okay, give us the skinny, like what the heck is happening? And he's like, okay, don't ever say that. I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay, pedarse means to fart, right? Okay, I don't know how that works into dude, what's up? I don't get it, but anyway, so that's what basically we were saying to the pastor and the grandma at home. So the next time we learned a word, and they'd say, puchica, and I'm like, that even sounds bad. Like, I am not saying that word. And they're like, you know, puchica this, puchica that. You know, it's like in circumstances like you drop your book, you stub your toe, ay, puchica. And I'm like, what? No. And they're like, no, like for real. And I'm like, totally don't believe you. Not after last experience, right? So we did the smart thing and went to our language coach. Okay, dude, what's the deal with that? And he's like, yeah, like that's like no big deal. Like it's like darn, basically, right? It's just not a big deal, but it sounds terrible, right? So, but then we went a step further because I still wasn't sure I was quite believing this guy. And I'm like, okay, would you say it to a pastor? Yes. Can the pastor say it from the pulpit? Yes. Would your grandmother say it? Yes. Okay, we're in the clear. We're good to go, right? So, navigating those things, that's not just a women-specific thing, but that was just a fun story, so I had to throw that out there. So, what is my worth? What do I contribute? What do I bring to the table? I bring me and my obedience, and I go with that. And as long as you follow that, then you're on the right path, right? So what do you have to offer as a woman? Yourself. I mean, you have Christ and the Holy Spirit indwelling in you, and that's what you bring to the table. And that's a whole lot. So if you're just 18 and want to go on the mission field, if you're just a stay-at-home mom and, what can I contribute and how can I help? A whole lot. So assess that. How do you feel in your heart? What is your worth? And I'll talk forever, so I need to wrap this up. Mike preached once in Africa. Now, if you've ever been to Africa, and if you've ever been to a church, I don't know anybody that qualifies, probably some people in here. Okay, we don't go for our 90-minute service. You're there for 3 to 6 hours, right? So you got to bring lunch. You got to plan, right? Especially if you have kids, you got to plan. And potty breaks, especially in places that don't have bathrooms. I don't know. I still didn't figure that one out. So, so Mike was out preaching at the church that we were going to, and at the end of, the second or third time he preached there, the pastor came up and he's like, what I really love about Brother Mike is he can say so much in so little time after his 40-minute sermon. So, again, it's a cultural thing. You got to figure that out. So I will say much in little time is what I'm saying. So our sister who was saying she didn't want to share her testimony in 2 hours, which I'm sure we would have listened to her for 2 hours, right? But then the other thing that women do is we compare ourselves. We can be our own worst enemies, right? And the weird thing about women, okay, guys, they just lay it on the table. You're stupid. Yeah, you fart too much. Okay, end, right? They're done with their conversation. They move on. They're still best buddies. Women are not that way, right? And it's not pretty. And that's why my best friend is my best friend, because she can just tell me straight up, Erin, you're stupid right now. And I'm like, oh, thanks for telling me that. And then we love each other and we move on, right? So we can do that. Women don't do that. And how long was your labor? How short was your labor, right? Those are all battle cries. When did your kid first start to walk? When did they first start to talk? We do that, comparing ourselves without realizing, well, maybe internally realizing that, but externally, oh, you just love your kid. They walked at 6 months and they were talking full sentences at, 2 and whatever, right? We just do that. And so, trust me, that doesn't change being on a missions team. It doesn't change just because you've changed locations. And interestingly, it doesn't really change culturally, too. I find that women in many cultures do that. And so then the comparison game comes, right? So that's another interesting struggle for women on the mission field. I did full-time ministry. That's the way I worked when I had Madison at home. I homeschooled her. I worked full times, 12-hour night shifts, and I basically stayed at home. So I had the whole package. I was able to be a stay-at-home mom and a full-time working mom at the same time. So I continued that practice when we went on the mission field. I had a full-time ministry, opened a clinic in the middle of the jungle, and now we did send Madison to school because we wanted her to understand the culture, understand the language, and what have you. But I had women on the team saying that were angry with me, and I didn't know that. And they were angry at me because they saw what I was doing, and I assumed that I had the same expectation of them. And I truly did not know that until it came to a big shebang, and it all came out on the table, and I'm like, why would you even think that I would expect that of you? I expect you to be the best example of you in whatever that means, in whatever capacity that God has brought you here. That's what I expect of you. I don't expect you to do what I do. First, you're not a nurse, right? So that's something to talk about and something to think about and something to realize and recognize, because honestly, ladies, we know it. I see you all shaking your head. We just do it. And it's ugly. It's not pretty, right? But it's something that we need to recognize. So I'm going to challenge you to be a guy sometimes and just say, you fart too much and we're all good, and you leave it on the table and you move on and you love each other. Okay? So if you're a part of a mission-sending agency, or not a mission-sending agency, a missions committee on your team, and you've got folks that are out there and they have women out there, my other challenge to you is don't ask, how's things going? Because they're going to say, great. We planted a new church, and all these kids are coming to our kids program. You say, how's your prayer life? How's your kid? How are you? How much are you sleeping? You know, what does your blood pressure look like, right? Ask those kinds of questions, because I highly, highly suspect, unless you have a very good personal relationship, but they're not going to share it with the missions committee, that they are not going to share that with you. And just know for a fact that those missionaries are out there and they're struggling, okay? That's not an exception. That truly is the norm, okay? I don't care, first world, third world, whatever, everything in between. We lived in the murder capital of the world for 7 to 8 years that we lived there. I lived in a house that had 10-foot walls with concertina wire around the whole thing and bars on my window. And yet in the midst of that, my husband was beat up by MS-13 and a gun put to his head, right? We lived in Africa, where the longest elected president in the entire world lives, and the police force and the military are so corrupt, they had an election and 114 people on our street were shot because they were of the opposing party. Mike and I were thrown into we were taking a picture, just random, well, he was taking a picture, random, whatever, street side scene, doesn't matter. We were pulled over in the taxi, and the Secret Service, their equivalent of Secret Service, came, grabbed us out of the car, threw us in his car, and drove us around for 45 minutes. If you ever get bored, Google Black Beach Prison. It's one of the worst prisons known in the world. People literally go and disappear. Well, that's in the city that we were at. So 45 minutes into this ride, where we're being, why are you here? What are you doing? He grabbed our phones. There's no privacy protection. Grabbed our phone and going through all these pictures. Why are you taking all these pictures? Et cetera, et cetera. Where Mike told me and then he started driving down this alley where there was no people, no cars, no lights, no nothing. And Mike and I looked at each other, and he said to me later, he was literally 3 seconds away in English to say, jump out of the car. We have a better chance of being shot and surviving than being thrown into Black Beach Prison. So, gratefully, at the end of that story, he got bored with us, I don't know, went into town, opened the doors, and dropped us off in the middle of, town. I have no idea to this day what that was all about, but know that your missionaries are struggling. I don't know that they all have that kind of story, but they have a story. They have many somethings that has gone on that they're struggling with. Okay, so ask very pointed questions. And for your ladies out there, you need to be even more so, okay? Because the guys are also going to put up that strong face, all is well in my world, and yet they are struggling, okay? The women, we also have a very unique thing, a unique role that we play, and it burdens our hearts. And so, anyway, on that happy note, I think I will finish. Unless there's like a question. Is there a question? It's got to be the best question out there, and then I think we're going to lunch. Or Mike's going to tell me I don't get to ask any questions. Oh, he's still looking down. Okay, quick. Is there anyone that has a question? All right. I'm happy to talk with you afterwards if you'd like, and yeah, that's all I got.